Hi, my name's Jane Benson. I finally just arrived in the studio. Oh, mask off. Soon, hopefully, we'll begin the day with a different gesture other than mask removal. Let's hope so. But for now, welcome to the studio. It's actually a new studio that I'm still adjusting to, so it feels bare and too organized at the moment, and my books are still in boxes and hiding behind the mobile wall that I just panned over. And there are no windows left because I covered over them. But I thought I'd talk to you about two bodies of work that you can see on the walls, and a new collaboration that I'm working on with some incredible young men and women at the RDJ Refugee Shelter in Harlem and the Pihcintu Choir in Portland, Maine. Most of the work that's in the studio was actually made during the lockdown in a room in my apartment, and the political mayhem that ensued long before the pandemic, and the pandemic itself is key to the development of the work. It shaped it, specifically the sound element of the cut text work. It's all informed by a brilliantly scathing and philosophical work called The System of Nature, which was published in 1770. But the arguments it presents have uncanny and depressing parallels to the reasons the pandemic occurred and persists. In The System of Nature, which was originally published under the pseudonym Mirabeau, but written by Holbach, Holbach discusses that the source of humankind's unhappiness is his ignorance of nature and man's alienation from nature. Oh, there's a huge, unabashedly fake plant in the middle of the room, but I'll get back to that in a little bit. He talks about how we're all slaves to fiction and falsehoods and chimeras that today take the form of fake news and the devastating delusions of many of those still clinging to power. All this because we don't follow the laws of nature, cause and effect, the relationship between things, science, intelligence. Anyway, the large colour field prints that you've been seeing as I walk around, and I'll focus on them here, are about 8 feet wide and are sculptural colour field prints that hover in an illusory space between 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions. They're created by locating the syllables of the solfege, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, the notes of the musical scale throughout certain chapters of the System of Nature, and then designating a colour to each note using Newton's colour spectrum. For example, T is blue and La is green, so is yellow, etc. I then use an algorithm I made to determine the opacity of each colour, so the colour's density is determined by the frequency of the note's appearance on the page throughout the chapter. Rather than being a solid colour field, there are thousands of dots that comprise these multiple layers of prints. So the large abstract fields, I think of them as reflections on water. I suppose there's so much reflection to be done to imagine a new landscape. There are 10 of these in total, but you see 4 of them right now. The cut text and sound works also relate to specific chapters in the System of Nature, those that I felt are poignant and speak to the need to respect the laws of nature. They're double-sided, and these are pages of the text that I cut holes in wherever the syllables of the solfege appear. So wherever the notes of the musical scale appear, there are holes, and the pages end up punctuated and resembling the scrolls of an old hand-cranked piano. You can see the front. From the front, it feels like a constellation of dots punctuating the text. And then on the reverse side, there's what appears more like a scroll of a mechanical piano. In a further step, I reduced these punctuated pages of text down in scale so that I could play them on a very small hand crank piano on my rooftop. And I'll play you a quick excerpt. This is chapter 5, Nature, Order and Confusion. So I recorded during the lockdown at around 4 a.m. For each chapter, I sat on the roof, and at dawn, I played each score, and whilst listening and recording the sound of the dawn chorus and the birds singing. I thought that created a really beautiful and poignant mix with the sound of the excavated score. So I'll play you an excerpt now. This wall of small works, you see, here are excerpts from the System of Nature. This is an excerpt from chapter 7, Nature and Her Laws. It's just mounted on matboard by cutting a slice through the matboard near the top and inserting the top of the print. The small works are themselves also partially sculptural, both two-dimensional and three-dimensional at the same time. And finally, I'm also working on a collaborative project with the RDJ Refugee Shelter and the Pihcintu Choir, working with some amazing young men and women who sought asylum or are currently seeking asylum. They're writing their stories, and then I search for the score within their story. And the sound of I search for the score by locating the musical scale, the syllables of the solfege as it appears throughout their words. So it's sort of like recording the sound of their story, the tone of their story. This is a piece called A Debt That Cannot Be Paid by Elaine Zhang. That's a pseudonym. And after I've excised the text and found the score, the writers perform their found score. And the final sound piece is either left as a pure, abstract, minimal recording of the performance of this found score within their story, or we go one step further and mix the performance of the score with music composed by various composers. I'm currently collaborating with Salome MC, who's a brilliant rapper. She's actually known as Iran's first female rapper, and she's going to be working with 4 of these stories, taking the performance of the found score and recordings of the writers rapping their text, and then composing hip-hop music around these core elements. So it'll end up being a mix of this very experimental abstract score and sounds of the writers rapping and of hip-hop music. I don't have a recording of this yet, but when I do, I'll let Fong know, and hopefully you can hear some excerpts. I'll stop there, as I think I've been talking for too long, but thank you for joining me in the studio, and I hope to see you soon.